Thank you for listening to Soho Bites, the only podcast in the world, as far as we're aware, dedicated to talking about films set in Soho, the beating heart of bohemian cosmopolitan London. If you would like to support the show, you can do this in the form of a star rating or review at sohobitespodcast.com/review, or if you'd like to put a small amount of money where your mouth is, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Donations can be from as little as £3, which will buy, at London prices, about half a drink for one of our thirsty guests. You may hear some different URLs in the upcoming episode, but by far the easiest way is to follow one of those links. They are again sohobitespodcast.com/review and sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you for your continued support and enjoy the episode.
Welcome to episode 2 of a brand new series of Soho Bites, a Soho on Screen podcast. My name is Jing'an Young. I'm a writer and researcher into the depiction of Soho, the beating heart of cosmopolitan bohemian London in British films. In my own research, I've written on the ways London's Soho is no longer considered the demi-monde of the metropolis, but its post-war reputation as a milieu for the convergence of hedonists, beatniks, striptease artists, and spivs was rooted in its historical function as a refuge for immigrants and its early modern development as a centre of consumption. This is no more so evident than in its function as the birthplace of nightlife and nightclubs in London. This week, we're staying up a little past our normal bedtimes here at Soho Bites, for the theme of this episode is Soho nightclubs. In a few moments, we'll be hearing from someone who has a very personal connection to the music scene of 1950s and 60s Soho. Later on in the show, we'll be talking to Mel Byron about Street of Shadows. Renamed The Shadow Man for the US market, this low-budget film noir stars Hollywood import Cesar Romero as Luigi, the owner of a pin table saloon located on Old Compton Street. Although the film holds an intriguing setup and strong supporting cast including Kay Kendall and Victor Madden, the film doesn't quite live up to its promise. Or does it? Find out in the second half of the program. Jessica Martin is a singer, actor, and impressionist with an impressively long and diverse CV. She also has a very particular connection to Soho. She's appeared on stages all over the country as well as the West End, starring in shows such as Me and My Girl, Spamalot, and Sunset Boulevard. Last year, she took the role of the notorious Dame Shirley Porter, the former Conservative leader of Westminster Council, in a play about her life called Shirley Mander. And as if that wasn't already enough strings to her bow, she recently added another by teaching herself to draw from scratch and becoming a successful graphic novelist. Her latest book, Life Drawing: A Life Under Lights, was published a few weeks ago and is a part memoir of her life. A major player in the story of Jessica's life is her late father, Placido Martin. Known to everyone as Ido, he was a musician, band leader, and local celebrity in Soho in the 50s and 60s. He specialized in Latin music at a time when the mambo and the cha-cha-cha were all the rage, and he led quite an extraordinary life. To find out more about Ido, my producer Dom met up with his daughter Jessica in a busy Soho Square one sunny afternoon.
My late father, Ido Martin, came over to London from Singapore. I can't be certain of the exact date, but I think it was around 1954. He was of Burmese, Filipino ancestry, and he was a musician. He had been a professional musician from the age of 14 with his father, Alejandro Martin, who was the leader of the dance orchestra at the world-famous Raffles Hotel in Singapore. So that, in a nutshell, is my ancestry, which is I am the band leader's daughter and the granddaughter of a band leader too. But my father probably was unique in that at the time he came to Soho, there were a lot of immigrant population, but I think possibly my father was the only one with such a kind of interesting and unusual cocktail of the the indigenous regions. It was literally an adventure. He knew there was a very, very respected pianist called David Ung, who had gone to London ahead of my dad, and he was doing very well as a musician. And I think, according to my dad, he was sitting having a drink with his buddies, with Uncle Dave and Benny. And there was another musician they saw who's getting on a boat which was bound for Colombo in Ceylon first, and that was going to England. And he sort of shouted out, "Hey, Ido, do you want to come with?" And my dad had been this professional musician from 14, and he was up for adventure. And adventure is exactly what he got, because no sooner had he come to London, and the first place that he would have gone to would have been Archer Street. Archer Street was an amazing, a real street in Soho, and I don't know whether it was every Monday, but musos would all gather, sit in a cafe, and unlike my profession, I'm sorry to be so disparaging about the acting profession, but everyone's very kind of precious about their contacts, but musicians were very kind of, "Hey man, I got the number for this, they need a trombone player," or "Hey, how heavy is your double bass, can you make it over to Ronnie Scott's next week?" So I have to say, I had to imagine a lot of the story that I put in my book, but I've imagined a scene where he meets David Ung in a cafe in Soho, and David Ung has said to my dad, "Hey, Ido, if you want some gigs, there's an agent." So my dad's first agent in London, he was Don Black's brother, Michael Black, who's still with us. And on the couple of occasions that I've bumped into Michael Black at a charity gala, he said, "Oh yeah, I remember your dad, Ido, coming off the boat, and we got him work." And the first job that Michael Black got my dad was a gig in Reykjavik, Iceland, a jazz festival at the Hotel Borg. They were on a fishing trawler to Reykjavik, and my dad had a ball, by all accounts, which I kind of found out when I was about 11, what a ball my dad had.
Should we touch on this a bit later?
Yeah, let's touch on this a bit. So, yeah. The main place that I know that my dad had a residency at was called the Côte d'Azur Club, and that was on the site of Ronnie Scott's, had been in a different location to the one it's at now. And wherever that location was, formerly, before it was Ronnie Scott's place, it was the Côte d'Azur Club, and that was a place where Latin music was, mambos and cha-chas were the thing in the 1950s, and whereas we had, discos arriving from the mid-60s onwards, in those days it was like my dad's live band with their kind of ruffled shirts on and, looking like they just stepped off the boat from Cuba, but they were from all these other places.
Eager arms wanting my caresses, so quick to discover I couldn't care less. Your technique may be almost sublime, but take it from me, boy, you're wasting your time.
That was a place where he achieved a certain amount of, he was kind of like a pop star. People knew who Ido Martin was and they loved his music. So he had a residency there, and then he had various residencies. There was the Pigalle Club, which is still around on the corner of Piccadilly. There was another place, I don't know where that was, called the Blue Angel. There was the Lirandale, which was later in his career, because I can remember as a teenager going to that, which was in Swallow Street, just off Regent Street. The thing that I was most proud of was that Daddy had a dance band at the Talk of the Town, which is now the Hippodrome. And he was there in the days when they had people like, Judy Garner was headlining, and Tom Jones, Shirley Bassey, and they had a full night of entertainment. So Dad would be on first with his Latin trio, and then there'd be a slightly bigger band later before the main act came on, and that was then Burt Rhodes and his orchestra would be with the Frank Sinatra or whoever was in town. So he made his way around Soho.
I'm warning you now, boy, you're wasting your time.
My mother was aware of Dad's fame, Ido Martin, who's got the band at the Côte d'Azur. She was working not as a waitress in a cocktail bar, but as a waitress in a themed restaurant. They were a feature of London life that has just kind of vanished off the face of history. She worked in a place called the El Cubano, which was a South American themed restaurant in Knightsbridge. And then after hours, she and her friends would go to a club called the Discotheque. But Dad, after his gig had finished, he and the guys would head down to the discotheque and they danced to records. And he and my mum, I would say they probably were dancing to a cha-cha-cha or a mambo. They never actually got married. My mum fell pregnant. And my dad, I sort of touched on the idea that he was a bit of a pop star. He was very popular with the ladies and there was always a girlfriend. And I don't know that my mum understood that she may not be the exclusive. Whenever I saw the film The King and I, and everybody fell in love with Yul Brynner, but the character was very scary, and he had, despite this wisdom that he had this sort of very childish perspective on life, and that was my dad all over. I always remember one of the wise things he said to me, which was like, I would get frustrated when I was sort of trying to get into the industry as a teenager. He'd just say, Jessica, the irritated oyster makes the pearl. And he was full of all of that stuff and so sage, but he had the shortest fuse imaginable. And I now think, he, like a lot of creative people, he was just bipolar, and God forbid that you should get in his way when he was in a depression because he'd lost a job or maybe mum had found out about one of his girlfriends, and it's just like, I can kind of see that we were in the way of his progress on this path to some kind of destination of creative genius that he was never going to reach, because as soon as he mastered something, it's like the next thing and the next thing. And we just kind of happened, but he never took responsibility for that. You know what? We didn't just happen. It takes two to make a family. But having said all that, for whatever reason, and I like to think that maybe I charmed him, with my cute little singing and all the rest of it, but I arrived on the scene and he didn't, wander off. He was there, and but for my mum, it was a terrible existence because she always felt like she was almost like there, but by the grace of God, we've got a roof over our heads, and she had to put up with whatever nonsense there was going on because it was a terrible thing. She come over from Ireland, and I think it was probably 5 years before her parents even knew that she had children. I was sat down by my mum when I was about 11 years old, and I'd already had the birds and the bees conversation when I was 10, so I knew it wasn't that. And she very quickly gave me a backstory. So guess what? She and Dad weren't married, and the reason was that he was married to somebody and he just hadn't gone through the practicalities of getting a divorce. Oh, and by the way, he had sired a son 17 years previously, and that son had been writing to Dad and was going to be coming to London to stay with us next week. My brother is called Valgeir, and he still is alive, thriving in Reykjavik. So when I met him, he was 17 and I was 11, and he was just so cool. I mean, my father was about 5'7", and my brother was 6 foot. And I was thinking, God, where'd you get that height from? And he kind of looked like Al Pacino, because he had the dark hair, but he had this pale complexion and these big eyes, I guess Icelandic looking eyes. And he could speak really good English, and he could play piano and he could play drums. My dad, at that time, he wasn't in Soho. We're talking around 1972-ish, and he had a residency at the Royal Garden Hotel in Kensington, and he had a jazz trio there. And he gave my 17-year-old brother responsibility of being the drummer. Bought him a dinner suit, dicky bow tie, and everything, which was a big deal. My dad, despite being a kind of, laid-back jazz musician, when it came to work, he was very focused, very disciplined. He practiced his music every day. And my brother was a 17-year-old teenager with heaps of talent, but no discipline, and he slept in till all hours. And they had a couple of rows, and then all of a sudden it's like my brother said something about, I think my granddad needs me. He's fallen ill back in Iceland, and bye-bye. And he'd been with us for maybe 3 months. For my brother to kind of pass the litmus paper test and be good enough to be in my dad's band was quite a big thing. And I think that's why my dad was so disappointed. It's like he couldn't actually take the responsibility that, hey, you know what, you didn't do any bringing up. You've just got, your DNA's just turned up on the doorstep, and he happens to be a brilliant musician. But, it was like my way or the highway. I'm doing a cabaret based on my book called Life Under Lights, and I'm doing it at Cafe Zadel, which is kind of Soho-ish, Piccadilly. Doing that in September, and I sent a copy of the book to my brother and crossed my fingers that he wouldn't be offended, because I've told the whole story. I haven't sugarcoated anything, but he loves it. If you look at my dad purely as a historical figure, and well, he had a string of girlfriends. As far as I know, I've got one brother, but there may be other siblings I've yet to meet. And he was not a nice man to women in his life, because he was a misogynist. But he did love me, and he was very proud of me, and he was my mentor.
Thank you to Jessica for coming on to the show, and we're very pleased to say she'll be making a return later in the series to join me in a conversation about a Soho film. There'll be more information about Jessica and her work in the show notes.
Hello, this is what's known as a mid-roll ad. It's one of those annoying interruptions that's inserted retrospectively at just the wrong point. And the reason for it is that Soho Bites takes up hours of time every month, and I'm hoping you might be able to support the show. There are two ways you can do this. One is for free, and it's to leave the show a star rating or kind review. You can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/review. Or if you'd like to assist financially to help cover our costs, you can do that at sohobitespodcast.com/donate. Thank you very much. Apologies for the interruption, and back to the episode.
Today's featured film, Street of Shadows, or Shadow Man, was based on The Creaking Chair by Lawrence Maynell, and is centered around a pin-table saloon called Luigi's, located on Old Compton Street. Although largely filmed at Merton Park Studios, there are a number of notable sequences filmed on location in Piccadilly Circus, Trafalgar Square, Soho, Covent Garden, and of course, Fitzrovia, also known as North Soho. The first scene is a marvellous visual document of Soho during one summer in the 50s. It is one of two sequences within the film to take place during daylight hours. Following the opening credits, which are superimposed over an aerial shot of a policeman surveying his Soho beat, followed by a black cat who mischievously jumps out from a rubbish bin, we cut to Luigi's assistant Danny, or Limpy, played by Victor Madden, who is briskly making his way down Charing Cross Road. This sequence is accompanied by the film composer Eric Spears' skipping defiant harmonica score, which resembles the Third Man's theme. To talk about Street of Shadows, I sat down with comedian and old movie geek Mel Byron. We're here with Mel Byron, who is a comedian who has a one-woman show called Old Movies Changed My Life. Saved my life. God, I'm sorry. Can you tell again, please? We're here with Mel Byron, a comedian who has a one-woman show called Old Movies
Saved my life.
Which has already had a very successful run at the Brighton Fringe, I believe.
And Edinburgh Fringe, yeah.
It's very, very cool. We're here to talk about a sort of a B movie. Maybe not very successful B movie, in your opinion.
Not in my opinion, sadly.
Called Street of Shadows. It was released in 1953 and directed by Richard Vernon. So we sent you a copy of this film because even though you've seen it on television, but you rewatched the film. So I'm really interested to know what your thoughts are about this B film. This B noir.
It is very much a B noir, I think. For me, it's not successful as a film. For me, the measure of a film is, did I enjoy? It's pure enjoyment. Yes, of course, you can find interesting little details in there, but did I come away thinking, well, that was a good use of an hour and a half of my life? Well, honestly, in this case, sadly not, for a whole heap of reasons.
Well, one thing which is quite unique about the film, but maybe not so unique in this period, is the sort of importation of Hollywood or B Hollywood actors, Cesar Romero in this case.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously this was a period in the 50s where lots and lots of American actors were coming over for, I guess, all kinds of reasons. I mean, there weren't the parts for them that there had been in the US in the 30s and 40s. But some really, really big people. I mean, it wasn't just Cesar Romero, who spent most of his life either in B films or as the supporting actor who didn't get the girl. You know, people like Ray Milland came over, Orson Welles. So it's unsurprising that Cesar Romero came over. It's unsurprising that he thought this was a good thing. I don't know how much money he was offered. And he made 2 films as far as I know, but I haven't seen the other one. I mean, were they trying to break the American market and therefore to get somebody of Cesar Romero's magnitude is a bit of a coup for them? Is that how that works?
I feel it's a combination of that. But I mean, we can only go by on sort of press reports and sort of, for example, Noose, which, 1948, which is Joseph Corleo, and started on the stage, wanted to come here because he wanted to be in Arthur Miller's All My Sons at the Lyric Hammersmith, the British kind of premiere. So with Cesar Romero, I've tried to sort of research this, but I assume it's just being able to do these 2 films and also the clout of being in a British European production. I mean, how many chances do you get to do that?
Yeah, and as I say, for him, I think his career, he was a prolific actor. He'd been in lots and lots of films, but I can kind of understand, for a man who'd spent a good portion of his life being, the second fiddle actor, that he would want to be given the lead in what sounded like they might be quite interesting films, and it's Europe, and hey, who doesn't want to spend, 6 months a year in London filming, because that's kind of cool. But I think the ultimate results are really not very good. Certainly, if Street of Shadows is anything to go by, maybe he should have stayed at home.
So one thing about the film, which of course is part of my interest, is that a lot of it is shot largely around Soho and is supposed to take place in Soho. And because this podcast is all about Soho, what is your Soho?
My Soho. Well, I moved to London in the mid-'80s, and Soho was, I'd heard of Soho as being the place of the Raymond Review Bar and places that I probably couldn't go to, and a bit dark and a bit seedy. And I had seen it in films. Possibly I'd seen this one by this time, I can't remember, but it was a place that it was a bit naughty to go there. And that's really sort of my first instinct about Soho. And obviously I've grown up and it's changed. So it's not quite the sleazy place that it was. I tend not to go there very often, actually. I find it too crowded and too noisy. Sometimes I go during the day, but I'd never go at night if I can avoid it. So given that this film is set almost entirely at night, this is absolutely the time I wouldn't be visiting Soho.
And that's interesting, the idea of it being, the film being very darkly filmed. The cinematography is very much emulating this kind of American noir, and you can't see anything in that murkiness, and the seediness comes through. And what are your feelings about that?
To be honest, I found it deeply irritating, actually, because it's really interesting. I was watching it most recently. I was watching it sort of on the tablet screen. Now, I realise in 1953 they didn't film it thinking, one day people will watch this in their bathroom whilst we're brushing their teeth. But there were bits where I just couldn't see what was going on. I think whoever lit it, whoever photographed it, and the direction, they didn't understand about that contrast, the noir light, the broken light. They just thought, it's got to be dark, so we'll just make it black. And there are times I genuinely could not see what the heck was going on. In your traditional noir, Hollywood noir, you look back at the sort of Raymond Chandler, you look at some of that Murder, My Sweet. There's all that. There's always the Venetian blinds and the broken light, or a cigarette lighting where there's just that little bit of light. There's always some light. You can actually see what's going on, but you are conscious that you're in a kind of penumbra. You're in a kind of shadow. The film's called Street of Shadows. You can't have shadows without light, and yet sometimes all you can see is just blackness, and it drove me absolutely potty. So in the few scenes where it is actually daylight, it's such a relief, although not much really very interesting happens in any of those, except the one right at the beginning where we're setting the scene. If you would say what is the epitome of the film, the Soho, the British noir of that time, then it would be Night in the City.
Night in the City. The night is tonight, tomorrow night, or any night.
When they made Street of Shadows, and I think they were trying to emulate that success very probably, but with a much lower budget and without perhaps the skill to do it. As I say, it felt like they'd taken all these sort of typical noir things, and then just sort of that, if we do that, and that, and that, and that, and we put them all together, there you go, we've got a film noir. and it just doesn't come off. Yeah. Night in the City is definitely a Hollywood film made with Hollywood money here, and it has much higher production values. And the story is better. The story is better. It's a much richer, deeper story.
If we say that the lighting is not noirish, perhaps the themes of the film are what kind of, permeate the imagination about being noir. Like, the idea that, so in the film, Luigi finds this photograph of Barbara Gale, who's played by the illustrious Kay Kendall, and he becomes almost kind of a little bit obsessed with it before his henchman Limpy, he passes it on to Limpy, right?
He looks at it, he obsesses a tiny bit, and then he passes it on. So again, there's not the mood, there's not... As an audience, we're not drawn into what seems like a burgeoning relationship with this woman that he's never met. So I think they're trying to do all the things that... It's like somebody read a textbook about American noir and thought they'd have a go, but didn't quite do it. The sixth form project to create a noir film and didn't quite pull it off. So, yeah, we've got the noir themes, and we've got, the setting, you've got the nightclub. But again, the nightclub owner traditionally in noir is always the bad guy. So right at the beginning, of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, where's this going? Cesar Romero, he's going to be a wrong 'un, isn't he? And then about 20 minutes into the film, oh, hang on, he's actually quite nice. Look, he's making a roast dinner for Kay Kendall. What a lovely man. Hang on a minute. No.
I think the other really strange thing about the film is his profession, which we should add is as the owner of a bar and a thing called a pin table saloon. Or saloon.
Yeah, so it's a nightclub, but it's with fairground things. I don't know if this was a thing in the 50s. It's certainly the only occasion I've ever seen this, with funny fairground attractions and air guns and whatever. So it's not a traditional nightclub, but yeah, it has some of those traditional nightclub things, including the screen that he opens so he can look out into the nightclub and have a look at what's going on. And of course, that is obviously, again, going back to the noir. It's like they had all these boxes to tick. Oh, he's got a nightclub. He's got to have the screen that he can open so he can see into the nightclub. Oh, we'll have that. Well, that looks good. And it's kind of like, they just ticked all the boxes and somehow made a film out of them.
And another film scholar John Hill suggests the key to understanding Britain in the 1950s is affluence, of a nation moving inexorably forward from post-war austerity and rationing to Macmillan's soap flake Arcadia. And if we look at the film as this sort of post-war, explosion of kind of consumerist attitudes, towards Americans, towards this, like you said, this arcade of just, but still quite austere.
But we're still quite austere. 1953, if I'm right, I think rationing had only just fully come to an end. By then. But I guess we think of the 60s as being the time when there was real sort of a boom and people's lives, lifestyles really started to improve. But at the 50s, I think we hadn't kind of got there yet. And so there is still very much this contrast in that film. And the Kay Kendall and her friends and Bill Travers, very interesting to see Bill Travers playing a really quite unpleasant posh boy. And they all go to this pin table saloon, but they are very much the posh people in an environment that isn't for posh people, because their attitude, their behaviour, the way they drink too much, the way one of them touches Limpy and says, "Oh, he's got a club for that's lucky," and it's just patronising, and so I think that the division is still very stark.
Who said you could call me Limpy?
Isn't that what she called you, the girl?
Yes.
Oh, Limpy, old son, this machine's a fraud.
No scenes, Nigel, please.
It's a bent penny. Some people are mean. They hang on to them for so long they get bent. Here are your lordship, with the proprietor's compliments.
This little fella knows a thing or two.
Nigel? Give me some pennies, Nigel.
There's Coppola. He's the man you want. Let go of me, you crazy cripple!
No quarrels, no fights. Young lady, you apologize to Limpy here.
I'm sorry.
Luigi!
and of course the lovely Surrey cottage that Kay Kendall lives in, which is one of her 2 homes. And Limpy and the girl Angèle, they live in these sort of rented, really quite scruffy down a hill rented apartments. So I don't think we kind of reached there yet. I think to me there's still that stark division, and of course it is, at the end of the day, it's the poor people who come off badly at the end of this, Limpy and Angèle.
That's a very good segue into the music. Composed by Eric Spear, who had another kind of really prolific career in B films and sort of B themes. But his sort of marionette theme with the harmonica, on Twitter you said, I've got my harmonica ready, so I'm wondering where it is now.
That harmonica just, again, like the lighting, the harmonica really annoyed me. To me, again, one of the things that I think they really missed here, when they were looking through their tick list, they forgot to tick jazz score, because the harmonica doesn't work for me at all.
A Monthly Film Bulletin, when it reviewed Street of Shadows, it called it, conventional thriller enlivened by Tommy Riley's harmonica solo. So Tommy Riley is the harmonica player of Eric Spear's song, particularly The Limping Man, which seems destined to share the fate of the Harry Lime theme.
I think I'd beg to differ there. I think that's giving it a level of quality and a contribution to the film that it simply doesn't have. The Harry Lime theme, you watch The Third Man, for me, the Harry Lime theme, so the zither music is almost like a character in itself. It stands alone, and it helps us to progress the story. It really has a massive part to play. This just doesn't. It's just annoying harmonica music that really is just wrong for this film. And it's only at the end when they're in the club and they kind of set up Limpy, and the jukebox starts playing. We get this kind of jazz theme. Finally, the jazz score that this film should always have had. But then the film ends. So very frustrating. But the harmonica theme didn't work for me at all.
So we've discussed sort of what you don't like about the film. So what do you really love about the film?
Love might be exaggerated. I do think Victor Madden is excellent in the film, and he is excellent. And I think he makes a lot of what is a very underwritten character and could actually have been given more to do, because it signaled to us very early on that there's something is going to happen to his character that is actually going to be key to the film. So I think for me that's one of the key things in the film. That's one of the really good things in the film. Otherwise, it's hard to pick on things. I think, that's great. I mean, yes, looking at London in the 1950s, I always find the old films that when you see them on location, really interesting, because I live in London and it's interesting to see what it looked like. So that's always interesting, assuming you can see it because the lights are on. But other films do it better.
How about the montage sequence with the champagne?
Yeah, and that's a good, that sequence where they're going round the clubs, I guess it's a kind of posh pub crawl, is quite interesting, because I guess back you could go to these a nightclub was a very different thing, wasn't it, back in the 50s? It wasn't dancing, and, it was sitting at tables, maybe dancing, but maybe having a quiet drink. So you get to see this sort of lots of different places that they go to, and then they end up at this pin table saloon that none of us had ever knew existed until this film was made, I think. So, yeah, that's quite interesting. So, yeah, it does give you a sort of interesting look at London in the 50s. As I say, I think it's done better in other films. But, yeah, that and Victor Madden, I think, for me, are the sort of standouts in this film. Otherwise, yeah.
But it's funny because, that montage sequence, there's a sort of thing which this famous scholar calls landmark London. And landmark London is the idea of montage through the big monuments, right? Like Big Ben and Tower Bridge. And then all these Soho films have these incredible montages of just, culture of consumption, just drinking or going to the theater or going to a strip club. And I think that's what's absent from this film is the subculture.
Mm-hmm.
The pin table saloon is a very sanitized version of subculture. It's not quite seedy, but it is seedy. And that's why I think you need Angela, because she's the seedy bit of the film.
Element. Yeah.
So if we look at sort of the kind of great, I think it's the best scene in the film is when Angèle kind of is being defended by Luigi, which I think kind of is the catalyst for the sort of rest of the film, showing his obsession with Barbara and trying to be social and blah, blah, social mobility. But that's interesting because that pub is the Marquis of Granby, which is located in Fitzrovia, which is also known as North Soho. Oh, NoHo.
No, I didn't know that.
But I wonder if that makes a difference to the scene, because she's being basically assaulted by an officer, even though it's sort of suggested she's a prostitute, isn't it?
Yeah, because I think somebody later on says that she was Luigi's steady, but she was, Limpy says it, doesn't it? She was not steady, but with lots and lots of other guys. You see, I didn't know that the Marquis of Granby, I had to look that up afterwards, was not in Soho as such. And everything would point to it being within very short walking distance from Luigi's place, because Limpy says, come, you need to come now. And so they walk very quickly to this place, and he beats up the sailor. So I kind of didn't pick up anything other than, okay, he's just walked to a different part of Soho. The fact that the guy was a sailor, for sure, there's something in that, but it wasn't. None of this is interesting. It is. I feel like a lot of it is a box ticking exercise. Or we've got this foreigner, this outsider, because of course Cesar Romero's character is supposed to be Italian. Literally punching somebody from the British Armed Forces. But actually, at the time, it just goes over your head because it's just, two blokes having a fight over a girl, Soho in the 50s, whatever.
Whatever indeed. So, Street of Shadows. Not a film which Mel Byron would wholly recommend, but it's still worth seeing just for the incredible on-location sequences. We found several online suppliers selling the DVD, which include Amazon.com. Thanks very much to Mel for coming in to talk to us about her experience. Mel is known for her one-woman show Old Movie Saved My Life, which ran to rave reviews at the Brighton Fringe this year. She'll be performing it alongside her one-woman show Karoshi, which is the Japanese word for death by overwork, later this month at the Faversham Fringe Festival. You can find dates for all of her upcoming shows, as well as her social media details on her website melbyron.com, and listen to her highly informative classic film reviews on the official Talking Pictures TV podcast. And thanks again to Jessica Martin. The gig that Jessica mentions in her interview, the cabaret based on her latest book, will be performed live at Zadell at the Brasserie Zadell on Sherwood Street on September 1st. Unfortunately, it's entirely sold out, but it is definitely worth contacting the venue in case of returns. There will be a link to more information on our website. Jessica's most recent graphic novel, Life Drawing: A Life Under Lights, is available at all online retailers. You can see more of her work on her social media as well as her official website, jessicamartinofficial.com. Do you have a favorite Soho film? The chances are it's already on our list, but we're always keen to hear of any more. If there are any that you'd like to hear featured on podcast, you can email us at sohobitespodcast@gmail.com or tweet your suggestions to Bites Soho. Please note there are 2 S's in the middle of that. The next episode of Soho Bites is all about crime, both organised and disorganised. Aidan McManus from Flip Tours London will join us to talk about the gangs that ran Soho from the interwar years onwards. We'll also be taking a stroll down the mighty River Thames with Adam Roche, where we'll be talking about 2 crime films from one very famous auteur. Until next time, from me, Jing An Young, and my producer Dom DeLargy, bye for now.